Hello. Good evening, everyone. Hello, pop star queen. IQ. Welcome, welcome. Good evening. I hope you all had a chance to eat dinner, hydrate. Maybe you're winding down for the day, or maybe you just got off work or school. I have to make tonight's stream a little chill. Hopefully you can all hear me properly like this. You might have to turn up your mic a bit. We're gonna use our evening sleepy voice. But thank you all for coming. So, today we are going to read the Twisted Wonderland novel, The Rose Red Tyrant. It's written by Jun Yoki, and we'll see how far we get in tonight's stream. So, how about we go ahead and start? And don't feel like you need to hesitate if there's any issues with my sound or you can't hear, okay? Now this is Rose Red Tyrant. Part 1. Welcome to the villain's world. Ah, my dear, esteemed benefactor, my proud, beautiful flower of evil, you are truly the fairest one of all. O magic mirror, thy wisdom I entreat, reveal unto me the visage that I seek. Smoke snaked from the mountain of debris, thick like rain clouds it puffed upward to blanket the sky. Fire had razed everything in the area, and anything that escaped the flames had been torn down by windstorms. Amid the wreckage, an iron window frame drooped, reminiscent of a withered plant stalk. Fissures cracked open the ground, and tree tops still stretched outward. All traces of the building's former majesty were gone. The sight was so dreadful that it would have been easier to accept the idea that this had always been a wasteland, and that the time we'd spent there had been an illusion. Ashes blew through the air. The wind swept up fragments of glass and pebbles that dug into my skin, prickling, stinging. I somehow managed to wrench my eyelids open, though they tried to stay shut to protect my eyes. The first thing I saw was the blue flame, burning up the dust and sending sparks scattering. The fire shimmered and licked the sky. When I looked closely into the flames, I could see eyes blazing brightly, protruding nostrils panting raggedly, fangs as large as my face. Before my eyes was a beast so large I could tilt my head back until it ripped clean off, and still not see the end of it. The beast's hideous face twisted into a fearsome snarl as it howled. Wah! Something moved in the corner of my eye, a person, and not just one. People in black robes dotted the scorched earth. Cowl hoods hid their eyes, and they shouted desperately. But I couldn't catch a word of it. The beast's jaw dropped, and its legs shook, unsteady once more. Neither could I hear the howl so loud and intense it shook the very earth itself. More intense than any of that was the voice whispering intently in my mind. The time left to me, to them, to you, is short. You must not let go of that hand. And so we have part 1. Welcome to the villain's world. Yes, that reminded us of the very prologue of the game, if you recall. A hooded figure stretched out a hand toward him. He had to take it. He knew this instinctively, without any conscious thought. But for some reason, he couldn't move. The monster before him grinned. Miaha! What was that sound? Yuya Kuroki suddenly felt like something was off. Myahaha, myahaha. I'd better find that uniform before someone spots me. The voice sounded amused and a little inane. Someone was laughing and humming to themselves. The happy-go-lucky feel of it was draining to listen to, and there was a weariness enveloping his entire body, like a soak in a lukewarm bath. He wasn't the least bit on edge. I feel like the total opposite of how I did a moment ago, he thought. I mean, that whole thing earlier was... Huh? Wait, what whole thing? He could remember being frightened, sad, but he couldn't really remember why or what had troubled him. Like a crumbling sandcastle, the more he tried to grab hold of the memory, the hazier the details became. In the time it took to blink, he'd forgotten all of it. Hello, Karori channel. Thank you for coming to tonight's reading. Well, that's how it is with dreams. Oh, huh. I guess this is a dream, too. He heard the carefree voice again, much closer this time. Well, okay, this is the one. This guy right here. If this is a dream, then I really wish you'd keep your voice down. I'm still pretty sleepy, and this place is so warm, soft, and comfortable. It's like I'm inside a giant hug or something. Just having his eyes closed gave him the ultimate sense of security. He never dozed like this before, and was quite certain that he would have the best dreams of his life, if he could just fall completely asleep. As Yuya dozed and started to drift off, the world around him began to shake violently, back and forth. What is that? He opened his eyes and was surprised again, as he could see nothing, only darkness. A darkness so complete that his eyes did not adjust to it, even after a minute or two. He didn't even know whether he was standing or sitting or lying down. He tried to shift, but discovered he couldn't move the way he wanted to. If he bent his legs the tiniest bit, his knees bumped up against something. It was the same with his arms and head. He was apparently locked up somewhere, and that somewhere was a very small space. The gentle embrace changed into firm restraint. Fear rose up inside him, and his palms grew damp with sweat. Ugh. He heard the voice again. This lid weighs a ton. Maybe I could smash it with something. Bang, bang. The shaking grew more violent, and his forehead slammed into something. Then the back of his head smashed into something too, over and over. The repeated collisions were making him dizzy. What on earth was happening? No good, huh? Well, I ain't giving up so easy as that. Yuya held his breath. What terrible fate awaited him next? Try this on for size, myaha. He thrust his hands forward at the same time as the voice laughed. He had to get out of there right that second. Ow, he cried out when something whacked him hard. It was the ground. He felt queasy, like his brain was rolling around inside his skull. He pressed his hands to the cold stone beneath him and staggered to his feet. Where am I? He wondered, and his voice echoed oddly. He had apparently fallen into a large space. He confirmed that he could move his arms and legs again, and felt a wave of relief wash over him. The surroundings were so dimly lit that his eyes adjusted easily to the gloom, even though he had just come from a pitch-black place. Maybe it was already nighttime. Yuya looked up and saw stars above him, just as he'd expected, but they were swinging wildly, strange somehow. When he looked harder, he realized they were not stars and the moon, but rather the components of a chandelier. Decorative drops shimmered like opals, illuminated by small candles. The light was rather subdued for how big the chandelier was. The candles looked like they would go out at the slightest breeze, and he felt anxious just looking at them. He used the light they shed to examine his surroundings. He was standing in what appeared to be a narrow hallway, and though the gloom meant that he couldn't tell what was ahead of him, there were black boxes on either side of him. Hundreds of them. Are these coffins? He murmured. The boxes were hexagonal, with long sides tugged out a bit. They looked exactly like coffins. Silver keyholes adorned the polished black lids. He could tell just by looking at them that the boxes were heavy, and they were just big enough for a single person to fit inside, in line with their supposed purpose. They were lined up in rows, crammed in on either side of the hall. Is this a graveyard? But then Yuya frowned, perplexed. All the coffins were bobbing up and down, as if they were having a truly great time. From a certain angle, it almost looked like they were dancing. He had no idea what the mechanism was, but if there was something inside of them, then the dancing was in pretty poor taste. While he eyed the bobbing coffins dubiously, he noticed that the one next to him was different from all the others. It had no lid, and it was empty inside. Black fabric lining looked soft and sleek, but he absolutely could not bring himself to touch it. As he looked around, he spotted the lid on the ground at his feet. Had he maybe just come out of this coffin? He couldn't be certain, but the coffin's padded interior had a human-shaped indentation in it, as if someone had recently stepped out of it. From where he was standing and the general situation, it seemed only natural to assume that someone was him. So why on earth had he been inside of a coffin? He shuddered. What was this place? He wanted to believe that it wasn't a graveyard, but he'd never seen it before and didn't know the first thing about it. Before this, he'd been, at school. Yuya massaged his temples to ease the ache in his head, and thought back through hazy memories. He left the classroom right after classics in sixth period. He had slipped past classmates heading off to practice and various extracurricular activities, and kept going, out the school gates to head right on home as usual. And then, "Hey, you," someone called out. It was the same voice he'd heard in the darkness. He hurriedly scanned the area, but there was no one around. "Do your eyes not work or what?" the voice snarled from below. "I'm right here." Yuya lowered his gaze. Stuffed animal? He wondered. A gray plush toy was sitting before him. It was of a decent size, as if it was stood up on its back legs, it might have reached up past his knees, the perfect size for a child to hug with their whole body. It had a striking striped ribbon tied around its neck, so maybe it did belong to someone. The insides of its ears and eyes were blue and seemed to shine with a hazy light, while the patch of snowy white fur on its chest was soft and fluffy. What kind of animal was it supposed to be? He'd never seen a creature like this. Its face was too round to be a dog, and it was too short and stout to be a cat. Fumbling through the process of elimination, he figured it was probably a weasel, he guessed. "How dare you!" the stuffed animal yelled as it turned its eyes up at him. "I am no weasel. I'm Grim, sorcerer extraordinaire." It looked like it was going to come flying at him at any second. "Whoa, it talked?" Yuya exclaimed as he jumped back. Maybe it's battery powered? If it were a mechanical toy, there would be a compartment somewhere on its backside, so Yuya reached out to pick the stuffed animal up to investigate, but it nimbly dodged him as the forked tip of his tail beat at the back of his hand. It was clearly moving with a will of its own. "So it's not a stuffed animal?" Yuya asked. He frowned, perplexed. "It's alive? But how can a weasel be talking?" "Listen, you. I'm not a weasel. I am the mighty Grim," the stuffed creature snapped, and then clicked his tongue. "And here I was going to peel that thing off you while you were sleeping. Way to ruin my plan, human." He held out his paw like a person, palm up, pink toe beans wiggling back and forth. "Well, whatever. Just give me your uniform and be quick about it." "Uniform?" Cocking his head curiously to one side, Yuya looked down at himself and cried out in surprise. What is this? The last he knew, he'd been wearing his school uniform, white shirt, school crest embroidered on the chest pocket, black trousers, an extremely simple, utterly average school outfit. And yet he was now wrapped in a black robe, even though he had absolutely no recollection of getting changed. The sleeves were embroidered with a complex pattern in gold thread, and silky fabric hung from his belt, completely covering him down to his knees. Reflexively, he lifted the hem and stared. The fabric was as soft as it looked. It practically melted in his hands. He'd been so focused on figuring out where he was that he hadn't even noticed that the clothes he wore were not his own. Even his shoes were different. Why am I, he groaned, when... Oh, come on. I don't have time for this, Grim snarled. Hand it over already. Whoa. Yuya just barely managed to dodge as Grim lunged at him. The stuffed animal picked himself up off the ground. You're gonna regret this. Monster, Yuya yelped, inching backward. Are you trying to bite me? He spotted a door by the stairs and bolted towards it. Now we're on chapter 2. I like too that it included a tutorial battle in the beginning. I like we got a very detailed description too of the Hall of Mirrors that we're in. Chapter 2. A dark hallway. A long staircase. Unsettling green light. The paintings on the wall spoke to him. Go right if you want to get out here. No. Go left. Where was he? Why were the paintings talking? Yuya was almost in tears as he stumbled through the unfamiliar building. But no matter how far he ran or where he hid, Grim was able to sniff him out. There were any number of doors lining the corridor, and Yuya desperately yanked at each of them. But not one would open for him. There appeared to be no one else in the entire building save for him and the creature, Grim. The hallway steadily grew narrower and more complicated until at last he found himself trapped in a dead end. Through the dusty glass of a small window there, he could see the moon looming so large it seemed fake, but at least this appeared to be the actual sky and not another chandelier. When he looked down, he saw another moon shimmering there, and he realized it was a reflection of the moon off water, which meant there was a river or ocean or something below him. But it was unclear how deep or far away it was, and Yuya did not have the courage to break the window and jump out of it. Hehehe, Grim laughed maliciously. That's it. Nice and quiet now. Stay away from me, Yuya yelled, shuddering in fear. The neat row of teeth in Grim's open mouth looked razor sharp, like they could easily take a chunk out of him. Grim inched closer, his tail flicking back and forth. Now, unless you want to get burned to a crisp, take off that. Ah, I found you at last. A voice from behind Grim interrupted. Splendid, but really, you mustn't go wandering off on your own like that. Grim whirled around, and Yuya looked up with a startled gasp. Huh? A man in a curious outfit stood before him in the hallway. The top hat perched on his head and the long coat that hung from his shoulders exaggerated his height and drew the eye. He carried an imposing cane shaped like a key. More conspicuous, however, was the black mask he wore over his pale face, covering his forehead and reaching down below his glittering golden eyes. The mask's nose was sharply pointed, like a bird's beak. Imagine my surprise when I entered the mirror chamber and discovered one of the gates was opened, the man mused languidly. I looked inside and found nothing but an empty shell. To think that you would open your own gate and step out before I could unlock it. Truly unprecedented. However did you manage it? Please help me, Yuya cried in response. I'm being attacked by a monster. You think you can stop me or something, Grim growled as he turned toward the man. You've got some nerve. I can take both of you easy. Snap. An inky shadow shot through the air. What? Grim yelped as the length of black fabric twisted itself around him and bounded his arms to his sides in a blink of an eye. The fabric stretched and shrank eerily as if it were alive. Meow! What's with the sash? It is not a sash. Consider it tough love. The masked man turned the tip of his cane in his hand toward the stuffed animal monster. You were about to use magic there, weren't you? Well, I simply cannot have you running around willy-nilly in this confined space. Well, okay, you asked for it. And there you go, trying to cast your magic again, the man said coolly, as Grim flopped around like a fish out of water at his feet. Black fabric covering his mouth now, too. I really must insist you do not. Each time the man waved his key-shaped cane, his tough love sash tightened around Grim. The weasel wizard looked like a frog being eaten by a large snake. As Yuya stared in a daze, the man turned to him. Dear me, yours is quite the poorly trained familiar. School rules do not permit untamed monster companions. Familiar? Yuya parroted. The man shook his head, exasperated. Not only do you go and open your gate, but you also leave the mirror chamber, immediately summon a familiar, and go exploring the school. Honestly, you are much more daring than your appearance would suggest. I don't understand, Yuya stammered. Where am I? The top floor of the eastern wing, the man replied immediately. The very farthest out from the school, currently used for storage. Yuya couldn't get a handle on any of this. School? The man nodded as if this were natural and obvious, and tucked Grim under his arm. He seemed entirely unbothered by Grim's desperate struggle. Your orientation has already begun. Come now, let's hurry back to the mirror chamber. My orientation? Yuya stared at him blankly. Yes, the man nodded again. The Academy's traditional orientation. I'm certain you've been looking forward to it. When Yuya said nothing, the man frowned and gave him a curious look. After a moment's silence, he asked, Do you actually not know what is happening? I do not. That is exactly the thing. Yuya was immensely relieved to have someone finally understand what he was going through. From the moment he opened his eyes, he'd been surrounded by unsettling weirdness, as if he were trapped in some kind of nightmare. The floodgates opened and all the questions that had been building up poured out. Where am I? What was that coffin? What is this creature? How did I get here? The man smiled placidly despite the abrupt interrogation. The time-space teleportation must have addled your memories. Well, these things happen, I suppose. No need to worry. I shall explain it to you while we walk. Truly, my magnanimity is boundless. The man extended a graceful arm to the bewildered Yuya, like a bird spreading its wings, although Grim continued to struggle and flail under his other arm. Flames sparked to life on the candles affixed to the walls. A string of light raced down on either side of the hallway, like an invisible runner with a match that was setting flame to the candles. At once, the darkness receded to the corners. This is Night Raven College, the man announced with a dramatic flourish. The most prestigious arcane academy in all of Twisted Wonderland, for students the world over who demonstrate a rare aptitude for magic. I am Dyer Crowley, having been entrusted with its care by the chairperson. I serve as head mage. Oh, I get it. This isn't like a nightmare. I'm actually still dreaming, Yuya thought absently as he looked at the smiling man before him. This was a dream. It was absolutely, without a doubt, a dream. After all, Dyer Crowley's words were too impossible, too unreal. You stand among the ranks, Crowley continued, as a fledgling sorcerer and new student at our college. Oh, let me adjust the chat window here. I didn't realize all the font was so dark. Let's see if I can fix that. So I am going to certainly change it. And Crowley does speak in quite the theatrics. Very dramatic indeed. Yuya was walking home from school alone when he was forced to stop by a light that was almost never red. It had been almost 6 months since he started high school, but this was the first time he'd ever been stopped at this crosswalk, despite coming the same way twice a day, every day. It was a narrow road that the bicycles rarely traveled, much less cars. He remembered thinking it was weird. The light finally turned green, and he'd just taken a step forward when he heard a strange sound. "What's that?" He frowned and looked around. "Feels like it's getting louder too." Brrr. It sounded like someone blowing air through closed lips. He had no memory of anything after that. "That was the carriage coming to pick you up," Crowley said, casually after hearing Yuya's story. "All of the students at Night Raven College go through gates and are brought here in horse-drawn carriages. To this day, we continue our college's time-honored tradition of sending a carriage to meet students." He looked back at Yuya. "How do you like that? Pretty impressive, yes? You expect nothing less from a prestigious school, hmm?" Yuya had a million questions, but given that this was a dream, there was no point in getting too worked up about the details. So he merely asked, "What's the gate?" "The gate that you came out of," was the answer he got. "That coffin was the gate?" he cried. "Yes," Crowley nodded firmly. "You come to the school and are reborn a magnificent mage. Quite the fitting concept for a youth brimming with such hope, yes?" Grim glared at Yuya with resentful eyes from where he was pinned beneath Crowley's arms. Yuya pretended not to notice this as he trailed after Crowley, choosing to go with the flow. He had apparently come quite a ways in his attempt at escape. They went down any number of staircases before finally arriving at a door he recognized. "Now then," Crowley turned to look at him, "we have returned to the mirror chamber. Finding you was quite the trial indeed, so I imagine the orientations already reached dorm assignments right about now," he broke off abruptly. Yuya looked up to see that Crowley's pale lips were pulled up into a grin. "Ah, this should be fun, he cried. "Sorry?" Yuya stared at him, brow furrowed. "I am simply dying to know which dorm will be chosen for you." The man in the mask clasped his hands together with a glee. "You are truly a breath of fresh air, opening your gate all by yourself and breaking the student mold. One does naturally harbor certain expectations." Expectations?" Yuya gaped. "Hang on just a second, Students," Crowley said, voice projecting outward as the door swung open forcefully, even though he had not so much as laid a finger on it. "I've brought your new star, the talk of our little town. Our freshest cohort is together at last." People. So many people. They were back in the room where Yuya had first woken up, but instead of the rows of coffins, there were now rows of individuals. Hundreds of them, and all their eyes turned toward Yuya as he stepped into the room. A heartbeat before he could turn and run, the door closed with a clack. "Ugh," Yuya gasped. The pillars shone with a warm light, making the room much brighter than it had been when he'd first seen it. Everyone gathered within it was wearing the same shadowy robe, as Yuya wrapped in the same inky black from the tops of their heads to the tips of their toes. But despite being dressed uniformly, one group in particular drew his eye. They were sitting in an open area toward the back of the corridor, facing the countless others. "Oh, head mage, you're finally here," called a boy with white hair adorned with a decorative headband. "We're done with the dorm assignments. We were just talking about what we should do now. You were so late, I thought maybe you had a tummy ache," he laughed cheerily. Yuya felt a flicker of relief at the boy's bright demeanor. "This the new kid who opened the gate all by himself?" "Ah," a tall, muscular boy snorted. "I mean, I have my doubts." Ears poking out from long, shiny dark hair twitched. They were animal ears. Unconsciously, Yuya stared and received a glare in return that turned his blood to ice, so he hurriedly looked away. The sharp light in the other boy's eyes were reminiscent of a large carnivore. "I've never heard of anything like that. How'd you do it? Brute force? Or maybe magic?" asked the person with golden hair that was pulled back, as he turned challenging eyes on Yuya. This individual was captivating and gorgeous, and Yuya wouldn't have been surprised about any gender they turned out to be. Their beauty was so astonishing that Yuya would have accepted without question that they were not even human, but rather a magical creature. "If it was magic, then you've got quite the power. We'd love to have you in our dorm," a boy with silver hair said to Yuya, a gentle smile crossing his lips. The smile itself was kind, but the narrowed eyes behind his glasses shone with a cool intellect. Every move he made was economical, as if he calculated the trajectory of his motions down to the last finger twitch. "Right from orientation, all eyes in the school are on you. Maybe you've been reading too much Cautious Hero or some other light novel." A tablet floating amid the hooded students flashed. Apparently, this was the source of the voice, which spoke with a rumbly pitch that felt like crawling through the depths of the earth. The words came too quickly for Yuya to catch them all, but the tone gave him the impression that the tablet was not particularly interested in speaking with anyone anyway. "It's already half an hour past the scheduled end of orientation," a boy with red hair announced flatly. "We should assign him a dorm immediately, in line with regulations." His voice was unshakably firm. He clearly was not about to allow any further waste of time. The students whispering about Yuya instantly fell silent, but their words lingered in his ears whether he liked it or not. Coming in late with the head mage? Is he seriously that great a mage? Huh, this guy's really going all in right from orientation. Pretty interesting. Some nerve for a mere human. Everyone there was keenly interested in Yuya in one way or another, and was clearly expecting great things from him. "No, I'm just a guy," he cried desperately, as if to wake himself from this nightmare. All his outburst did was make people look at him again, and the pressure of those countless pairs of eyes was almost enough to crush him to dust. He tried to step away, to retreat, but Crowley gave him a hearty push. He looked over his shoulder and frantically shook his head, but Crowley forced his heavy feet forward, farther into the corridor. "Now then, everyone's waiting," he said briskly. "Step up to the dark mirror and be quick about it." "The dark mirror?" Yuya furrowed his brow, and then swallowed the question at the tip of his tongue, because the answer was immediately obvious. A large round mirror was enshrined in the corridor ahead, looking magnificent with a shiny gold frame. A crown sat at its peak, and below it, twisting snakes were carved into the frame, encircling the glass. Just like the first gate Yuya had seen, the mirror was hanging in the air, suspended by nothing. Urged on by Crowley, he peered into the glass, and a boy with short black hair appeared on its surface. Eyebrows, nose, mouth, ears, all were utterly average. Not one thing distinguished the boy in any way. If pressed to highlight a notable feature, Yuya would have said that the boy's eyes were perhaps a little bit rounder than average. But even this did not conflict with his other features. The roundness of his eyes blended in with the rest so well that it would have been forgotten the second anyone looking at his face glanced away from it. Put nicely, the face had a comfortable familiarity to it. But not so nicely, it was mediocre, a sort of every man's face, which, if encountered in the morning, would be forgotten by evening. It was the face Yuya saw in the mirror each day. What was the point of making him look at it now? He had just opened his mouth to ask Crowley this question when the mirror abruptly flashed and green flames filled the glass. Reflectively, he looked over his shoulder. There was nothing there. The fire was only inside the mirror. As if to quench that fire, a haunting face appeared in the center of the mirror. Yuya couldn't tell if it was a mask, a doll, or an actual person. It was just a face. He gaped in amazement as he realized the mirror was showing someone other than himself. And then that someone spoke in a deep, masculine voice. "State your name," the mirror commanded. Yuya Kuroki," Yuya stammered. "Yuya Kuroki." He felt a tickle deep down inside. It was a curious sensation, like someone was tugging on the inside of his ribs. The man in the mirror had no eyeballs, only eye sockets gaping emptily. Yuya couldn't tell what he was focused on, and had the distinct sensation that the man was looking at all of him, into the deepest depths of his mind, leaving no stone unturned. The mirror said, "The nature of your soul is..." Meow. A cry interrupted the man in the mirror. Yuya looked back to see Grim break free from where he was held under Crowley's arm. "Ah, there he goes," Crowley sighed. "I was too focused on the dorm assignment." "If you thought you could keep me out of the game, you got another thing coming." Grim spun around neatly in the air and dropped to the ground. Standing tall on 2 feet, he threw his head back. "Nyah!" he cried, and a sea of flames spread out before him. Grim was shooting fire from his mouth. As he kept exhaling for a seemingly impossible length of time, given the size of his small body, the corridor instantly became a raging inferno, the flames the same pale color as Grim's eyes and exuding a dazzling heat. Yuya automatically covered his face with his arms. "It's so hot." It was fire. Of course it would be hot to the touch. Of course it would burn. This sent a shock through Yuya. This isn't a dream, he realized abruptly. "So you're trying to steal my thunder and get all the glory, huh? Well, you're way out of your league, buddy," Grim crowed. Before Yuya knew it, he was alone with Grim in the middle of a small circle of flames. "You'll have to fight me for it." "Fight?" Yuya asked as he stared blankly at the animal. "Me?" "Yep," Grim nodded firmly. "My plan was to switch places with you while all them dodos were sleeping. And then you went and ran off on me. But if I take you down, they'll see that I'm the one with the real power. And there'll be an opening for a new student." His large mouth arched upward, his fangs glittering. "That seat's as good as mine. Meow, I'm a genius." "We don't have to fight for it," Yuya said, nearly in tears, holding out both hands as if offering Grim a silver platter with his school enrollment on it. "You can totally have my spot. I don't even know what's going on here." But Grim paid him absolutely no mind and drew another deep breath, filling his stomach. Yuya turned and tried to run, only to feel a burst of heat scorched his back. If you won't play, Grim snapped, then I'll get this game started. Wait, Yuya pleaded. Stop. Don't. I surrender. Here we go. Don't. Yuya squeezed his eyes shut. Snap. He heard the air crack around him, and then everything went quiet. Even the roar of the flames had faded to nothing. Ever so timidly, Yuya opened his eyes to find the fire frozen around him, crystallized in its attempt to devour his surroundings, almost as if they had been forgotten by time. Tiny sparks became shards of ice and tumbled to the ground. Both of you, said a male voice. Crunch, crunch. He heard the sound of feet stepping on the ice, moving towards him. You seem to think you can do whatever you please here. The red-headed boy appeared in front of Yuya from between two chunks of ice. He was the one who had been annoyed by their late entrance earlier. Yuya had thought he was the taller one at first glance, but now his small physique dominated the entire room. His presence was threatening, the look on his face frightening in its anger. I will tolerate no more of this nonsense, the boy declared, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. Yuya cowered in abject fear, but Grim was either stupider or braver, and he returned the boy's glare with the utmost confidence. Grim growled. Another someone getting in my way. A large ice pillar stood where Grim had been only moments earlier. He raced up it leisurely on all four paws and laughed from up high. Listen up, I'm gonna knock all of you flying with my magic extraordinaire, he shouted. So you better... Are you ready for your sentence? The boy asked. Huh? Yuya frowned and looked at the boy. Something strange was happening. Grim also seemed to have guessed that something was off. Like Yuya, he stared at the boy with one hand in the air. Sentence first, verdict afterward. Incredible power. Yes, power. Not heat, cold, light, or wind. This was the only way Yuya could describe the overwhelming force that swirled like a vortex around the red-headed boy. Yuya simply stood there, rooted to the spot. He didn't try to run away, not because he thought he was any match for this force, but rather because he didn't know what else to do in the face of this enormous amount of energy. He felt like the nearly visible power might explode if he so much as moved a muscle. He was so frightened he could hardly stand it. The red-headed boy's arm dropped down towards Grim. Off with your head, the boy shouted. An arrow of light shot out at Grim. There was a brief flash, then the arrow transformed into a large red and black shackle. The second the open end touched Grim's neck, it snapped shut with a heavy clank. What in the... Grim shook his head, but the shackle held fast. You're supposed to be all tough, but your magic's a flop. Don't even try and collar me. I'll burn it right off. Yuya managed to cover his face with his hands this time, but all he heard was a faint wheeze. Huh? Yuya wondered as he timidly opened his eyes and saw Grim blowing on his own hands, baffled. Yeah? What gives? Grim scowled. My fire ain't working. Ah, good show as always, Riddle, said the boy with the glasses as he applauded from where he stood on the opposite side of the ice. The rest of the students were all looking at them too. They seemed like they were not so much simply watching what happened, but rather appreciating the artistry. The boy with the glasses laughed cheerily, paying little mind to Grim. Your signature spell locks down any magic, he said to the red-headed boy. It's really quite handy, isn't it? I've just got to have it. I've just got to have respect for it. Locks down magic? Grim yelped. Exactly, the red-headed boy Riddle said as he grabbed Grim by the scruff of his neck and lifted him up. Until I deign to remove that collar, you won't be using any magic. Yuya noticed several pillars of ice neatly arranged around Grim, blocking any escape route. They must have deliberately missed Grim with the earlier ice magic attack to guide him to this dead end and render him unable to use magic. Grim kicked and flailed against his sad shackle. "It's no use," Riddle told him. "You're not but a pet cat now." "Yeah, what?" Grim snarled. "I ain't nobody's pet nothing." "Oh, you've nothing to worry about then. I certainly have no interest in having such a rude and violent pet. Unlike a certain someone, I am no fool." Riddle glared at Yuya, who was watching the argument with a pale face. "You." "What?" Yuya replied, his voice a little too loud and forceful. "You really make a mess of things, Riddle said, his voice far too powerful for the slender frame it came from. "First you marched into the orientation late with your head held high, and then you nearly set the mirror chamber on fire." Overwhelmed, Yuya flinched and shrank as the red-headed boy continued to press him. "First of all, and above all else, this is a violation of the Queen of Hearts rules. You must know Rule 23. Hearts?" Yuya stammered. Rules?" "Your ignorance is honestly stupefying," Riddle told him. "Do you really not know the Queen of Hearts, Rule 23? One must never bring a cat to a formal affair." "No," Yuya shook his head quickly. "Incredible! Have you ever cracked a book open in your life?" "I'm sorry." Riddle's expression alone was enough to make anyone looking upon him shake in their boots. An almost murderous rage colored his face, a blue vein throbbing violently on his forehead. Yuya had serious doubt about his chances for survival if he said this was his first time hearing of any such rule. Instead, he bowed until he was nearly prostrate on the ground. "I assume you were attempting to flaunt your magical abilities through the use of your familiar. But this is strictly prohibited," Riddle said coldly. "It seems as though I will have to personally make you aware of the rules of this academy if we ever manage to finish this orientation." He whirled around resolutely like a robot, his robe flapping behind him. "I will tell you this. It matters not a whit to me which dorm is selected for you. Given that you've broken the Queen of Hearts rules, I must carry out my duty as the House Warden of Heartslabule." Riddle's footsteps echoed as he crossed the mirror chamber. As he approached the door, still holding Grim up, several other boys raced over to him. "Hey," Grim yelled, "what are you going to do to me?" "I'm not going to do anything to you," Riddle sniffed. "I'm throwing you out. That collar will be removed after a period of time. If you can't behave yourself, then it's back to your nest with you." Riddle thrust Grim out at the students gathered around them. They bent at the knee and accepted the squirming bundle of fur. All of their faces were marked with painted symbols: diamonds, clubs, spades, hearts. "You lot, remove this insolent fellow from campus," Riddle demanded. "Yes, House Warden," they chorused as one. "Curses, curse you! Don't think you've seen the last of me," Grim protested desperately, no magic coming from his mouth as he was yanked up by both of his arms. "You fools better remember my name. Just 'cause I'm gonna go down in the annals of magic history. Just you wait." The door closed, cutting his shouts short. In that last moment his eyes were full of regret. Watching from a safe distance, Yuya thought Grim looked like a captured weasel and felt a little sorry for him, but there was nothing he could do now. Not to mention that it seemed like Yuya would do better to concern himself with his own situation. Suddenly, something was pushed up against his chin and he choked. There was a flash of red in the corner of his eye. "The decision of which dorm you belong to will reveal to us your true nature. Now then, Let's have you show us this great power of yours. Riddle smiled deliberately with his mouth alone, the smile not reaching his eyes, and Yuya understood that this was a challenge. Although Riddle moved with an adult calm, Yuya guessed they were basically the same age. His still, plump cheeks were flushed, and he exuded energy and confidence. His pride as a powerful warrior was written all over his body. He would not flinch in the face of any opponent, no matter how strong. Do it, Riddle snapped. Right, Yuya answered, as he turned toward the dark mirror and the man appeared once again. He acknowledged Yuya standing before him and spoke the same words he had before. Yuya Kuroki, the nature of your soul is... Gulp. He heard the sound of someone swallowing hard from nowhere in particular, and realized the sound hadn't come from just one person. Everyone assembled before the dark mirror had gasped, waiting with bated breath for the dark mirror to continue. Their interest, expectation, envy, all of it danced on Yuya's nerves and weighed him down. He clenched, shaking hands into fists. He had only one wish. Please, please, nothing happen, please. He didn't know whether his prayer was heard. The dark mirror spoke again. Unclear to me. What? Asked Riddle as his eyes grew round in surprise. Next to him, Crowley was equally surprised. Dark mirror, what did you just say? He queried. I sense no magical power in this one. Soundless, colorless, shapeless, utterly vacant, the mirror continued. The chatter in the mirror chamber gradually grew louder. Therefore, no dorm would be appropriate. No door? Crowley cried. The students standing around looked at each other. Yuya could hear quiet laughter among the murmuring voices. When he turned around, the group of boys who spoken to Crowley when he and Yuya entered the mirror chamber were snickering at each other. Well, well, the boy with silver hair pushed up his glasses and said to the boy with the golden hair next to him, This is quite a disappointment, So who was it who first said we got this amazingly powerful student this year? The boy with the golden hair demanded. The head mage, the silver-haired boy responded. There's a recording of the whole thing in the log. Definitely him. The tablet flashed and a video played showing Crowley declaring, all of which is to say our very special new student stepped out on his own. I shall now go and seek him out. This is very exciting, everyone. The screen showed Crowley exiting the mirror chamber. When all the students in the school glared at the head mage, he hurriedly waved his hands in a defensive protest. It's simply not possible for the Black Carriage to receive a human being who cannot use magic, he insisted. From my understanding, the student selection process has not aired once in its century of existence. Well, don't get too down about it, the boy with white hair said, trying to cheer Crowley up. There's a first time for everything. I'm telling you that is absurd. Crowley looked to Yuya for salvation. Wait, you brought along that familiar, did you not? You must have magic then. Familiar? Yuya repeated. Do you mean that creature, Grim? Yes. I didn't bring him with me, he said, hurriedly shaking his head from side to side. He'd already told Crowley this is 1,000,000 times. He was there when I woke up. I've never seen that creature in my life. Oh, is that so? Crowley frowned. You really should have said so sooner. Yuya held his tongue, although he dearly wanted to snap that Crowley had simply gone ahead and assumed that Grim was his familiar. But the disappointment in the room came through loud and clear in everyone's eyes and sighs. He just wanted to make it out of this experience in one piece. All he could do was hang his head and apologize. Riddle snorted in laughter. The mess you've made of orientation is truly unforgivable. But I take back what I said earlier. I have no intention of scolding you any further. You're an outsider after all. Riddle looked deflated somehow, or maybe he was the slightest bit sympathetic towards Yuya. Either way, he immediately turned his gaze on Crowley, so Yuya couldn't tell what he was really thinking. Head Mage, may we please return to the dorms? Riddle asked. We have the new student tour. We're already 20 minutes late. Oh, yes, right. How about you go and do that? Crowley clapped his hands together, as this was a most welcome change of subject. I hereby declare that orientation has concluded. House wardens, please escort your students back to the dorms. The ones who moved at the word house wardens were the boys who had first spoken up when Crowley and Yuya had arrived at the mirror chambers. Some held their heads high, and others moved lazily. Whatever their reaction to Crowley's command, the new students all followed their direction. These house wardens were clearly leaders of some kind. Although most of the students followed the house warden's instructions and automatically grouped together, some looked around anxiously, searching the room with perplexed looks. Noticing this, Crowley cocked his head to one side and asked, Where is Malleus Draconia? I don't see him anywhere. The house wardens blinked. Now that you mention it, the boy with animal ears laughed. I knew I was feeling good for some reason. So that little lizard's not here. We forgot to invite him again, the boy with golden hair sighed. But rather than appearing frustrated or annoyed, he merely shrugged his shoulders, so Yuya couldn't really tell how serious he was. It seemed that only the boy with the white hair was actually concerned. His eyebrows pulled together in a V as he scratched his head and said, Again? Poor Malleus, we did him wrong. Honestly, you've only just realized he's not here. A small statured boy asked in a deep voice as he appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Yeah, Crowley jumped in surprise. Van Rouge, where did you come from? As before, there was no official notice about the orientation. I went out to look for him in a hurry there, but I couldn't find him yet again. With his vivid pink hair tucked into his hood, and wide, almost tearful eyes that were red like raspberries, this Van Rouge boy was as striking as any of the house wardens. Hehehe, Van Rouge laughed. Ah, poor Malleus. I just hope he's not angry. Sorry, the boy with the white hair said. We weren't trying to leave Malleus out of anything. He's the problem here, though, the boy with the golden hair interjected. I mean, he's not exactly the easiest person to talk to. Hehehe, don't say that, Van Rouge replied. We're all school chums, aren't we? Don't overthink it. Just be friends with him. The white-haired boy nodded firmly, while the beautiful golden-haired boy shook his head in exasperation. The other students looked around nervously. Van Rouge winked playfully. Well, not to worry. New students, in the place of House Warden Malleus Draconia, I will lead you to the Diasomnia dorm as the deputy house warden. The room burst into excited whispers. So the house warden for Diasomnia is the Malleus Draconia. It's true? He really does go to Night Raven College. Yikes, I totally don't want to run into that guy. Yuya figured this Malleus Draconia person must be famous if the sound of his name alone inspired this much fear. The boy with the animal ears clicked his tongue. I should have gone home to bed instead of wasting time at this orientation. He waved a hand. Savannah Claus students, follow me. Children, the tablet said, sounding deeply annoyed. I'll send the campus map to your phones. Find your way to the dorm. The light disappeared from its screen. The other boys in the room called out to one another and chatted as they sorted themselves out. Amid the commotion, Yuya heard Brittle's clear voice call out, Hartslaville dorm students, right face, right. First step with your left foot. Line up behind the deputy house warden. Their earlier enthusiasm fizzling out, the students neatly turned their backs on Yuya and marched out of the mirror chamber on quick feet, leaving only Yuya, Crowley, and the dark mirror in silence. It was Crowley who broke the silence. I am sorry about all that. Oh, Yuya said. No, I'm sorry I couldn't be what you were hoping for. It was Crowley who had simply assumed he was a new student and pushed his expectations on a reluctant Yuya. This whole fracas was something that Yuya had been dragged into against his will. And yet, in the face of Crowley's obvious and utter disappointment, Yuya felt the urge to run away, as if he himself was somehow to blame. Crowley sighed, clearly disheartened. Yuya couldn't help but wonder how he was able to express such emotion when the majority of his face was covered by that mask. I thought we might finally be successful this year if an impressive new student to rival Draconia were to arrive at the school. I don't really understand, Yuya said timidly in a desperate effort to keep from discouraging Crowley further. Perhaps Crowley felt better after wallowing in his emotions for a moment. I suppose not, he said, and cleared his throat. Let us turn our minds to other considerations, then. Yeah, let's, Yuya thought to himself. I'll be in real trouble here otherwise. They were finally getting to what actually mattered to him. So then, he said, what should I do here? Crowley pressed a finger to his chin. This is a most unfortunate turn of events. You do understand that I cannot very well admit a student with no magical ability to my academy. But worry not. It seemed that this was an error on our part, so we will use the power of the Dark Mirror to return you to your home immediately. This was quite the catastrophe, He turned toward the mirror and raised his arms. Lazy flames erupted in the mirror, and the man rose up in its center once more. Now then, O Dark Mirror, return this soul to where it belongs, Crowley commanded. At last he would be able to go home, Yuya told himself with a sigh of relief. Then he heard the mirror's words echo in his mind. There is no such place. What? Yuya thought, startled. There is no place in the world where the soul belongs. What did you say? Crowley asked as Yuya stood, speechless. That's not possible. Wait, didn't I say that earlier as well? My, but today is a veritable cavalcade of impossible phenomena. Crowley repeated his command, but no matter how many times he demanded the mirror return Yuya to his home, the mirror's response was the same. Nowhere. There was no place for Yuya to go home to. That was the only thing the man in the mirror would say. It doesn't know where he belongs, so it can't send him there, Crowley sighed, at such length that clouds appeared on the mirror's glass. What was your name? Yuya Kuroki, Yuya replied promptly. Yuya? Crowley frowned. Yuya. Yuya said his name again, but apparently it was too difficult for Crowley to replicate. What an odd name, he said finally. It's a bit hard to pronounce. Do you mind if I call you Yu? Yuya nodded his agreement, and the head mage grew thoughtful. Tell me, Yu, he said, from what land do you hail? I'm from Nihon, Yuya told him. Nikon? Japan. Yuya tried the English name of his country, but that apparently did not click for Crowley either. Japan? The lines on Crowley's forehead grew even more pronounced. Yuya had been speaking Japanese this whole time, and no one had any trouble understanding him up until this point, so there really was no point in trying with English. But wait, Was he really speaking Japanese? The words were leaving his mouth without any extra thought, and he wasn't having any issue understanding what anyone else said. But when he thought about it, he did feel like something was slightly off. The words he was thinking and the movements of his own mouth didn't match. I am. His mouth was opening and closing more often than required to say just those words, but the words still sounded the way they always did when they reached his ears. He thought he was speaking the language he knew, and somehow his ears and his mouth were naturally translating into a language he didn't know. He frowned in consternation. I am intimately acquainted with the origins of the students who come to Night Raven College from all over the world, Crowley declared. But I am not familiar with this Nikon or Japan, or what have you that you speak of. This is perhaps, he hesitated as he pressed a hand to his forehead. You may very well have come here from another world. Another world? Yuya parroted in disbelief. Crowley nodded, his face deadly serious. Despite Crowley sounding like he was telling a story straight from the pages of a manga or novel, Yuya found himself nodding at these astounding words. The moment he'd seen magic, the second he'd seen Grimm, maybe even from the moment he opened his eyes for the first time in this room, he had a feeling that he wasn't in Japan, or even on Earth. This was a different world. At some point, he had emerged into a world called Twisted Wonderland, where magic was a matter of course. But, he cried, but how would I? Crowley shook his head to say that he didn't know the reason himself. To think that the Dark Mirror would call up a student from another world. I've never heard of such a thing. I would like to know more if possible. Do you have any personal items that will allow me a greater understanding of you, or the world you came from, you? Greater understanding? Yuya asked. Yes, Crowley nodded. A driver's license, for instance. When I woke up, I was already in the gate. I was carrying a bag, but it disappeared with my clothes. I had my student ID in my wallet, but... Yuya patted himself down, frantically. My phone! I had my smartphone in my pocket, but it's gone now, too. Incredible, Crowley cried, eyes widening. So you have smartphones in your parallel world as well. I am also surprised by this, Yuya said cautiously. The first thing you ask about is a driver's license? He had assumed they had more fantastical things in this world, given the magic it contained. Crowley looked off into the distance thoughtfully. All of which is to say you have no personal effects on you. This is the predicament. Yuya really did have nothing, but when Crowley pointed it out, he felt cut adrift all over again. How was he supposed to live in a world when he didn't have even a single shoe to his name? It seemed that Crowley was also at a loss. It doesn't appear that we will come up with a solution to your situation any time soon, no matter how we might rack our brains. At any rate, you can stay at Night Raven College for tonight. You'll let me stay the night? Yuya cried, a surge of relief washing over him. Yes, Crowley nodded. I am loath indeed to expel you in this situation. There is a vacant building on campus not currently in use. You may stay there. Ah, that's great. You may call me Head Mage, you. Head Mage, Yuya repeated. Thank you so much. Before he knew it, he had taken both of Crowley's gloved hands in his own, overwhelmed with gratitude. There's a good boy. Wonderful. My kindness truly knows no bounds. Crowley smiled playfully. Now then, strike while the iron is hot, as they say. I shall take you to the dorm straight away. Please do follow me. And now we move on to chapter 3. Also, very interesting description of the events at orientation. And we get to hear a bit more about Yuya as well, them personally as a character. Let's take a brief break. I can drink some water, and then I'll continue reading right after. Be right back, you guys. Alright, so I have returned. How is everyone feeling? I set some rain and thunder in the background, hoping to really set the mood while I read through this. Alright then, let's proceed. So much more lore, indeed. That's what I really enjoy about the novel so far. I like the fact that they're going into more detail, especially with Yuya and how he's feeling. Because it does make sense, the orientation, the events during that time were really, must have been really scary, even though it felt more comedic in the game. Let's continue on to chapter 3. As they proceeded down the dim, deserted corridor, Yuya and Crowley told each other about their respective worlds. Both worlds had schools, and their civilizations appeared to be more or less the same. As the commonality of smartphones demonstrated, science and technology had progressed along similar paths. This world had an extra force, however, magic. Crowley was surprised when Yuya said there was no magic where he came from, but that was the only major difference they discovered so far. Who knew what other things might turn out to be fantastical in his world, but ordinary in this one? He couldn't let his guard down. He had to be ready so that he wouldn't be surprised no matter what came at him. Hanging his head, he gave himself a little pep talk and tried to prepare himself for whatever the future here held. Now then, Crowley tapped something hard with his cane. We are about to leave the school building. Huh? Yuya lifted his face and immediately squeezed his eyes shut at the dazzling glare. He felt a breeze blowing and a new scent reached his nose, the fragrance of a chilly tide. He gingerly opened his eyes to find the night sky spreading out before him. In the center was the full moon, bright enough that he could see the patterns on the ground. He'd seen the moon through the window before, but looking up at it again now, he felt overwhelmed by its vastness. It was so bright that he couldn't see any stars. Huh? He frowned. Why would you have an orientation at night? Because, unlike other schools, we are a prestigious institute for the cultivation of mages, Crowley declared. Naturally, we hold our important ceremonies at night. Makes sense, Yuya replied. Here it was already, the first piece of this world's unexpected common sense. He looked at his feet and the light of the moon reflecting off the gray stone tiles. There was nothing else around them, only the dark sky and the ground shining palely. As they walked, the world suddenly opened up. Yuya caught sight of a very long staircase, and at the bottom of it, far below, a variety of structures dotted the landscape. Tall buildings, rigid roofs, domes. He thought the school itself was plenty big, but the overall campus was larger than he could have imagined. The windows and the street lamps shone earnestly, undaunted by the light of the moon. Although Yuya couldn't see anything other than the moon in the sky, the tiny flickering lights of the townscape looked like stars and made it seem like the night sky continued to stretch out beneath itself. It's beautiful, Yuya murmured with emotion as he looked down on the campus from up high. Isn't it, though? Crowley puffed up his chest proudly. All of these magnificent structures provide an environment that cultivates a rich and full humanity in our students. Is the building I'm staying in down there? Of course. It is one of the most elegant and refined on campus, with plenty of character. Only a little farther now. Let us hurry along, Crowley urged. Yuya stepped out onto the first stair and faltered a bit at the height, but his mood was a little brighter now, perhaps because of the beautiful view. He made his way down the steep staircase with careful mindful of where he set his feet. And here we are, Crowley declared with an expansive wave of his arm. Step through the gate and behold your new lodgings, you. Free. There was an ear-splitting metallic shriek in response. This gate? Yuya asked, eyeing the collection of precipitously inclined iron posts, dubiously as they swung back and forth in the wind, threatening to snap off at any moment. Crowley was calling this heap of junk a gate? Yuya touched it timidly, and a rusty chunk crumbled and fell to the ground. He slipped through the structure that had once apparently been a gate, careful not to catch his robe on it, and stepped up onto the gently sloping staircase. Somehow, the surrounding air grew dark and more stagnant with every step he took. The moon that had been so dazzlingly bright when they left the school building was now hidden under a thick blanket of clouds. Weeds grew freely from gaps in the cracked concrete and made the ground beneath his feet even more uncertain. He nearly fell any number of times, propping himself up by clinging to Crowley each time, until they finally arrived at the building itself, a Western-style structure of the sort that didn't exist in an average residential area in Japan. At the very least, Yuya had never seen a house this big in his own neighborhood. Long, long ago, this used to be a dorm, Crowley said, his tone wistful as he looked up at the large door. It's equipped with all the necessary facilities, lounge, student rooms, bathroom, small kitchen. It had likely been quite an impressive place in its heyday. The pillars bracing the eaves were reassuringly sturdy, and the heavy door was solidly built. The issue was its age. The gate was in advanced stages of decay, and the building itself was in terrible shape. The light bulb at the entrance was broken, and the porch was riddled with holes. The window on the door was still intact, but given the general condition of the place, this felt like a minor miracle. The paint was peeling off, swollen in exterior walls, which rippled in deformed rays. Yuya quickly glanced around the rest of the property. Rain shutters and roof tiles littered the garden, where broken trees had been left to rot. This dorm, was basically a haunted house. The key ring at Crowley's waist jangled as he pulled it out and unerringly plucked an unadorned silver key from the dozen of other keys. He inserted this into the lock on the door. Yuya watched as the door still refused to open. Is that the right key? This should be it, Crowley frowned. I suppose the lock simply gotten a bit stiff because it hasn't been used for quite some time. It had been so long since anyone had come here that the lock had rusted. Yuya wasn't sure which was worse, sleeping in this place or in the creepy room with all the coffins he had left behind. Just as he was wondering whether he should ask if the latter was still an option, the door opened with a squealing creak. "Oh, there we are," Crowley said and stepped inside. Yuya took a deep breath and then followed the head mage. The house stank of mold, like a compressed and compacted version of the air found in the farthest reaches of a library. Yuya coughed as he walked down the hallway with Crowley. Truly, to the impression Yuya had gotten from its exterior, the building was quite large inside, but furniture was scattered all across the hallway, and it was no small bit of work to weave their way around it. While his attention was occupied by where he was stepping, his head collected spiderwebs. The lounge they eventually arrived at was filled with the same mess of broken furniture. "Isn't it delightful?" Crowley looked back at Yuya with a smile. "I grant you it is a touch old, but nothing a broom and some elbow grease can't fix. You'll have a ship-shaped place to spend the night in no time." He righted a candle stand that had fallen on top of the hearth and set a hand over it. The candles immediately sprang to life and set small shadows, maybe spiders, maybe mice, scurrying away. Yuya looked around the room in trepidation. "Well then," Crowley stamped his cane against the floor, "I'm off to investigate your place of origin in the library." "What?" Yuya said. "You're leaving?" "We must use our time effectively. I hope at the very least to learn a little bit about this world you came from." Crowley grinned and dipped his head, causing spiderwebs to catch on his top hat. "I'll no doubt return shortly. Please feel free to make yourself comfortable." He left Yuya in the lounge and firmly closed the door behind him, bringing down a storm of accumulated dust. "Make myself comfortable," he says, Yuya muttered under his breath. He was more likely to choke to death on the dust swirling through the air. With a sigh, he set himself to clean the lounge so he could spend the night there. Candle holder in hand, he stepped into the corridor, careful of the warped floorboards under his feet. He tentatively opened the small door at the end of the corridor and found a storeroom, just as he'd expected. He took an ancient broom from inside and returned to the lounge. He yanked open the windows and began to sweep the floor, pulling up a thick layer of dust like peeling skin. As he coughed and cleaned, he heard a pitter-patter against the wall, a quiet sound that quickly changed to the burbling of water. "It's raining," he realized. The gentle rhythm of falling rain steadily increased in volume as the sudden shower turned into a full-blown storm. In the distance he heard thunder rumbling like the purring of a happy cat. The bright moon and clear skies of the orientation seemed like a faraway dream now, or perhaps that had been magic too. He could almost hear Crowley saying, "Naturally, we take measures to ensure that this important ceremony sees a successful conclusion." The air coming through the windows was cooler now, perhaps because of the rain. The long-sleeved robe he was wearing, apparently Night Raven College's ceremonial dress, was perfect for the current temperature. When he heard the word orientation, he assumed it was spring, but it was fall, one of the 4 seasons of this world that matched the world he come from. He heard that schools overseas started their new school year in the fall, and from the style of buildings he's seen so far, the structure of this college did seem to be more closely related to schools in Europe or America than in Japan. He crouched down and peered into the large fireplace, wondering if he could maybe light a fire to make the room a little brighter. But there was nothing in it except charred remnants of fires past. He had no idea where to find something he could burn, nor did he have any matches that he could use to actually light a fire. He stood up with a sigh. There was nothing he could do here. What would the others do in this situation? Would they use magic, like Crowley lighting the candles with a wave of his hand? Or Grimm and Riddle at the orientation? How had he ended up in such a weird world? I'm all alone. As he stared into the fireless fireplace, Yuya was suddenly overcome with loneliness. What were his parents doing right now? He didn't know what time it was, but he guessed it had been a while since he woken up in the mirror chamber. His parents would have come home from work by now. Were they worried because he wasn't there? He didn't have any friends here he could lose track of time hanging out with. Once his parents noticed their son hadn't come home yet, they would most certainly be worried. As he pictured the faces of his loving parents, he had a sudden realization. If he couldn't go back to his original world, he'd never see his mom and dad again. Now, for the first time, his fear took on a definite shape, pressing down on him. He had been entirely preoccupied by one bewildering incident after another, which had been a good thing. It had kept him busy enough that he could allow himself to believe everything happening to him was part of an extremely weird dream, that this unfamiliar world and its dangerous magic were all someone else's problem. But now that he was alone, he was forced to face it. Would he ever see his parents again? What if he had to live here alone, in this place where magic actually existed? He felt something hot in the corners of his eyes. Reflexively, he reached up, about to brush away the tears, but then hesitated given how dusty his hands were. He tilted his head back and took a deep breath. He was determined not to cry, because he was scared, not at his age. He was embarrassed by his tears, even though there was no one around to see them. It would all be fine. Something would work out. There was nothing to cry about, he told himself, and he tried to swallow the sobs that threatened to spill out of him. Then he heard a wet splat. It wasn't the wetness of tears falling, though. With a gasp, he held up the candle in the direction the sound had come from, and saw a wet piece of fabric on the floor beneath the window. It looked like the curtain had ripped right off due to the extra weight of the rain soaking it. Everything in this building really was ancient. As Yuya went over to the window to close it, when someone or something leapt at his chest out of nowhere. "What?" he cried as he fell flat on his backside, and a dazzling blue flame burned before him. "Wow, it's seriously pouring out there," said a voice. Yuya's mouth gaped open and shut. The thing grinned and laughed. "Myahaha, that look on your face is priceless, like a bat that got blasted by a water gun." Grimm? Laughing at him once more was the little creature that he had started chasing him around the moment he opened his eyes in the mirror chamber. But Grimm had been kicked out of the school at the orientation. He caused such a ruckus that Yuya had assumed the school would have put some kind of measure in place to make sure he couldn't step onto the campus again. So how had he gotten in here? Maybe no one thought he'd be so persistent. When Yuya looked closely, he saw that Grimm was missing the shackle Riddle had locked around his neck. "What are you doing here?" he yelped. "It's obvious, duh." Grimm rolled his eyes. "I'm here to fight you so I can be a student at this college. People keep getting in my way, but this time for sure you're going down." Wait, there's no point in fighting me. Yuya stopped Grim with both hands as the creature started to take a deep breath. I'm not a student here. A lick of fire flickered out from between fangs. Huh? What ya mean? Yuya told Grim what had happened after he left the mirror chamber. You mean you can't use magic? Grim scrutinized him with wide eyes. Exactly, Yuya nodded. Well, didn't see that one coming. Grim shook his head slowly. Sucks to be you. You don't have to actually say it, Yuya groaned. The desire to flee that had welled up in him during the orientation was rekindled. He wanted to be anywhere but there. As if to strike the final blow on an increasingly despondent Yuya, Grim let out a huge sigh. So beating you to a pulp's not gonna get me in, huh? Well, guess I better think up another way. Another way? Yuya asked. Yep, Grim inched closer. I take you hostage and threaten the head mage. Yuya shoved the creature back with the broom. Although Grim seems to have given up on the idea of fighting him, he couldn't let his guard down just yet. Why don't you give up already? Don't be stupid. I ain't never giving up, Grim declared, and leapt onto the back of the sofa. Even in that position, he still wasn't quite at eye level with Yuya. Nevertheless, he began to speak with overwhelming passion. I was born to do this. I'm a magical prodigy who's got the marked makings to become one of the greatest mages who ever lived. Which is why I figured I'd be a shoo-in at the famed Night Raven College, and why I was waiting and waiting for that black carriage to come for me, and yet it never did. Grim fell silent, drops of rainwater falling from the tips of his drooping ears. He looked so much like a stuffed animal when he wasn't moving, that with him soaking wet and hanging his head like that, Yuya almost felt sorry for him. While Yuya struggled with how to respond, Grim suddenly shook himself like a dog and water went flying everywhere. Grim snorted. His brash grin was back on his face. That dark mirror and the head mage got no eye for talent. I'm totes destined for greatness, to be the most powerful mage ever. Not letting me in is a great loss for the whole wide world. I am going to school here, wherever it takes. But you don't know what they'll do to you next time, Yuya protested. You're already in so much trouble. Just give it up. Never. I will be a great mage, Grim screeched, and it was clear that he would not listen to a word that Yuya had to say. Yuya couldn't handle Grim setting everything on fire again, so he held his palms out, placatingly. Okay, fine, I get it. So what do you mean by all of this great mage stuff anyway? So okay, a great mage, right? We're talking the most amazing mage ever, Grim said. Yuya was pretty sure this was not really an explanation. But Grim ignored his doubtful demeanor and went on, eyes shining brightly as he recounted his dreams to Yuya. A great mage super popular and powerful. You want something done, that's the guy you call. When I'm a great mage, everyone will be all, Grim so cool and Grim so strong. And what a genius Grim is. Total respect. Wow, sounds amazing. Yuya was only going along with Grim, trying not to stir anything up, but Grim seemed satisfied. He snickered somewhat derisively. That's the dream, eh? But too bad for you. Can't use magic, so you can't be a great mage. Okay? What I'm saying here, you've got no chance. I may be fine with that, Yuya said. Liar, ain't a soul alive who doesn't want to be a great mage. Grim crossed his arms with a malicious smirk. No point in pretending you're all tough. I mean, truth is, you gotta be wishing you could use magic like me. Yuya pictured it for a moment. What if he could use magic? It would be handy, and probably lots of fun. But that didn't mean he was stewing in his own thwarted ambitions or feeling panicky. Grim could boast and brag until the sun set, But Yuya didn't feel so much as a twinge of jealousy towards these magic users. "D- Do you even get it?" Grim stammered. "If you were a powerful mage, you could do anything, everything, with magic." Magic. A parallel world. Yuya honestly couldn't care less. He only wanted one thing right now, to go back to his own world. "You've got some screws loose, buddy." Grim pursed his lips in a pout and sat on the sofa. Suddenly he opened his eyes wide. "Whoa, the bottoms of my feet are all white." "Oh wow, they are." Yuya peered at his paw pads, which now looked like bits of cotton. "I guess it's because you were walking around this dusty place after getting soaked by all the rain." Yuya had only finished cleaning half the floor, after all, and they haven't even gotten started on the sofa. "Us?" Grim looked around like he was only just noticing the state of the room. "Oh yeah, everything is all whitish, and it stinks like mold. How am I supposed to sleep here? Get cleaning already." "Huh?" Yuya wondered whether he heard wrong. "Did you just say sleep?" "Yep," Grim nodded firmly. "You're planning on staying here?" "You betcha. You seem like a guy who maybe gets it. I won't take you hostage for now, so give me a place to live instead." "But Grim," Yuya protested, "you just got thrown off campus. The head mage is gonna be back soon, and honestly, I really don't need any more trouble." "You're gonna shoo me out into this rainstorm?" Grim turned incredulous eyes on him. "You're a cold one, dang. So you're saying you don't care if my fur gets soaking wet and I catch a cold and it goes and turns into pneumonia?" "I didn't say that. I mean, I didn't, but..." Yuya really didn't want to aggravate Grim, but he got the feeling that letting the creature who disrupted the orientation so spectacularly stay was only going to be a headache for him. While he struggled to decide what to do, Grim suddenly screeched and leapt up. "Wow! Something just fell on my back!" "Huh? Was it..." Yuya looked up at the ceiling and glimpsed a wet spot. "Of course there's a leak. How old is this building?" "Meh," Grim snarled. "Get up there and fix that garbage roof." I can't." Yuya stared at him blankly. "I've never repaired a roof before in my life." "You can just magic those holes. Oh, wait, right. You can't use magic." Grim burst out laughing. "Man, you're so useless." "Okay, fine then. Boring guy like you can just go and get a boring bucket or whatever, can't ya?" Yuya turned exasperated eyes on Grim. This creature clearly only cared about himself. Grim rolled around laughing on the sofa and then abruptly stopped. "Yeah." "What? More rain?" "Yeah, yeah." Grim reached out towards Yuya. Are you trying to give me something?" He held his own palms out in return, and these were slapped away immediately. "No, you dolt!" Grim yelled. "Behind you!" "Behind me?" Yuya turned and saw white smoke drifting up in the middle of the room. He assumed at first that it was another fire, but he couldn't see any flames. Where was the smoke coming from? He cocked his head curiously to one side as he looked down and then up. Hee hee. The white smoke echoed with laughter as a face formed within the shapeless mist and met the astonished Yuya's eyes before it started flying around the room. Hee hee hee, yee hee hee hee. With shaking hands, Yuya tried to shine a light on it, but the smoke slipped away into the darkness. He peered into the gloom, trying to follow it. "We haven't had visitors in ages," came a voice. The abrupt words sent shivers up Yuya's spine. "How long has it been anyways?" Lightning flashed outside the windows, and a bolt thundered nearby, as if to further shred the ripped curtains, and for a split second the dark room was bright as day. "Welcome to our home," the voice continued, as a semi-transparent something floated in midair, smiling creepily as it stretched out its hands. Ghosts! Yuya yelled. White, floating, and see-through, Yuya and Grim were definitely staring at a ghost. Stay away from me, Grim cried, whipping the ghost with his tail. But the white haze only vanished into nothing for a moment before quickly coalescing again into its original form. No matter how hard Grim tried to smack down the ghost, his tail simply passed right through it. Meanwhile, the ghost seemed utterly unfazed by the entire situation. What in the world? My tail's all tingly. Grim tucked his tail between his legs and shrank back against Yuya's legs. The ghost giggled gleefully again. Yuya suddenly realized they weren't up against just one ghost. Several pairs of eyes appeared in the air, all of them staring down at him from every direction. Always nice to have visitors, one ghost commented. We get so bored, you know. All the people who used to live here got scared of us and ran away, noted another. Real weird. Their white bodies had no legs, instead stretching and trailing off into nothing like a lizard's tail. They bobbed toward Yuya and Grim, gently but with an air of finality somehow. Yuya felt a powerful chill. As the ghosts approached, he felt as if he'd been tossed into a vat of ice water. His legs trembled, his jaw shook, and his teeth chattered. He wondered if the icy tendrils creeping up from his feet will eventually reach his heart. He could see the light of the candle on the table through the bodies of the ghosts. We just want some new pals to play with, a ghost said as it leaned in, colored red by the flame, and its face was abruptly enormous. Lips pulled back into a frightening snarl of a smile. How about we make you into ghosts? Maybe it was because his legs were frozen, or maybe it was the terror, but Yuya couldn't move, or scream. He was rooted to the spot, while next to him, Grim's ears twitched. He guessed Grim was probably just as scared as he was, and lowered his gaze, then nearly did a double take. The look on Grim's face was the exact opposite of what he'd expected. Grim's nose was wrinkled, and his throat rumbled with a low growl. Flames flickered out from between his fangs, and his eyes blazed with outrage. I ain't afraid of ghosts, he exclaimed. When the ghost had first appeared, Grim had shrunken up against Yuya in fear, but he had clearly gotten over that initial shock. All his fur was standing on end as he aggressively leaned forward. How could he be so determined even now? Yuya looked on in surprise while Grim stood on all fours and shouted, I'll show you what I got. Wow! The area around them grew abruptly brighter. Flames lapped at the floors and the walls. It was the orientation all over again. Don't! You're gonna set the place on fire! Yuya grimaced at the heat and reached out to try and stop Grim, but the creature slipped away, chasing after the circling ghosts, balls of fire flying everywhere. Hop, hop. Not even close, one ghost taunted. Go ahead and fire off your sad little magic until you die. 'Cause we can't, you know. We're already dead and everything. Shut up! The angry Grim kept shooting off fireballs indiscriminately. Pop, 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 pop. Yuya raced around and put out the tiny fires with his shoe, or his hand covered in his sleeve. The rain was actually a blessing, he realized. Because of it, the room was so damp that the flames basically just smoldered when they hit the floor of the furniture. But he could tell that the constant heat of the fire was starting to dry out the dampness. It was only a matter of time before one of those fireballs truly lit something on fire. If he didn't put an end to this, the building really would burn down. Grim, stop! Stop it! Calm down! Yuya shouted desperately, but his voice was drowned out by the rain beating against the windows. Hee hee hee! Missed by a country mile! Over here! This way, a ghost taunted. Ugh, you've got a lot of nerve for someone who's already through. See-through. Quit popping up and disappearing already, Grim growled. Yuya's head spun as the ghost roared with laughter, and Grim just roared. The intensifying thunderstorm only made his panic that much more acute. He was so scared and worried he could hardly stand it, his heart leaping and pounding in his chest. Why did Grim keep missing the ghosts anyway? It definitely wasn't because the ghosts were moving too fast. They bobbed towards them and away again, gently drifting around Grim and Yuya as if teasing them. They were moving so slowly that Yuya probably could have tossed the ball and hit one of them. Did the ghosts have some kind of special power? He examined them carefully. No, it was Grim. He was closing his eyes every time he let loose a fireball, and there was no way he was going to hit anything firing blindly like that. At last, flames began to eat away at the sofa. I have to stop this. Yuya clenched his fists in determination and crept toward Grim. The monster was totally focused on the ghost in front of him and had apparently forgotten all about Yuya. Waiting for the moment when the jet of fire streaming from Grim's fanged mouth broke off, Yuya grabbed Grim with both hands and lifted him up in the air, and then started running, eyes straight ahead, not looking back. He couldn't dodge the ghost blocking his way forward, so he slipped right through its white body. He reflexively screamed at the sudden chill that wrapped around him, which felt like standing in front of an open refrigerator door. Stumbling forward, he managed to escape into the hallway, slamming the lounge door shut so hard it threatened to break. That was too freaky, he said as he slumped down onto the floor in front of the door, the nervous tension draining from his body all at once. Grim was frozen in his arms, perhaps still processing his sudden abduction. But then he let out a gasp of realization and glared up at Yuya, demanding, "What are you doing, you jerk? I had everything under control." "You nearly burned the whole building down," Yuya snapped in reply. "Fine," Grim sniffed. "Then you deal with them." Yuya shook his head back and forth so hard it nearly flew off his neck. "I can't." "Oh, what? You a little scaredy cat?" Grim sneered. "It's just, I've never been in a fight before." "Shut it then. I don't need any lip from a useless human." "Sorry." Grim was painfully correct. There was nothing Yuya could do except apologize. But if he gave up now, the best case scenario was that they ended up pals with the ghosts. Worst case was the same, except with extra suffering as they were burned alive along with the building. "Listen," Yuya worked hard to keep his voice even. "I was watching you in there. You kept closing your eyes when you were using your magic, you know. And I just kind of feel like maybe it's gonna be hard to hit anything like that." Grim cocked his head to one side, pursed his lips, and mimicked himself shooting fire, and apparently noticed for the first time that he did indeed have such a habit. "Well, I can't help it. When I go ooh with my mouth, my eyes go eh," he said, showing Yuya his technique. This seemed pretty clumsy to Yuya, like not being able to walk and chew gum at the same time. But maybe he was in no position to talk. While running toward the ghost, he had been so scared he squeezed his own eyes shut. Perhaps deep down, Grim was scared too, he realized. Grim had the courage to face ghosts all alone though, unlike Yuya, who was simply frozen in place. Couldn't Yuya at least help him? After considering it for a minute, he had a flash of insight and looked down at Grim on his lap. "I got it. There's an easy fix here. I'll tell you where the ghosts are, like left, right, up, that kind of thing. Then you shoot fire in that direction. That way your magic might hit them." "Huh? Why should I take orders from you?" Grim said, insulted, and began to flail against Yuya. He was clearly raring to charge back into the lounge and start firing again. "Wait," Yuya squeezed Grim tightly to hold him in place. "Just listen to me." "Nope." Grim said, still squirming. You think you're all hot stuff when you didn't even do a single thing in there. I'm sorry, Yuya said again, but if you don't... Are you about done here? Came a bright voice abruptly from above his head, and he nearly replied to it automatically. He managed to hold his tongue and ever so timidly looked up. A ghost's torso was poking through the closed door. Wow, a ghost! Yuya exclaimed. When the ghost slipped through the wall, Yuya and Grim leapt backward. The ghost gave them a once-over. Sorry to bug ya in the middle of your chit-chat, one said. We just got sick of waiting is all. The end of Yuya's nose grew cold. The ghosts were almost on top of them. Get away from us, he cried. Stay back, Grim yelled. Yuya thrust his hands out at the ghost, and Grim breathed fire, lost in the moment. Ah, it burns, a ghost yelped. The ghosts were on fire. Actually, they were less on fire and more riddled with holes where the fire had shot through them. Just like a shadow disappears when its owner steps out into the light, the bodies of the ghosts disappeared under the bright gleam of flames. Grim had finally made a hit. Piece of cake, Grim said, looking at the panicking ghost. Hey, human, point me towards the ghost. You got it, Yuya said, as he picked the creature up again and carefully aimed him at a ghost. Now! The world before him flashed with a pale light. Ah! Another ghost was knocked flying back by Grim's blast. Ah, got one. I knew I was a total whiz with magic, Grim said as he looked back at Yuya and grinned. Keep 'em coming, human. Roger, Yuya said. Though Grim had objected to Yuya's earlier suggestion of telling him which way to aim, they were essentially doing that now. But they were moving together rather than Grim obeying Yuya's orders, which seemingly made this arrangement more acceptable to Grim. In fact, he seemed to be having fun as he let his fire fly. Yuya supported him with both arms, as if he were gripping a hose with the water turned all the way on, and together they dispersed the ghosts. Yaha, I am the greatest, Grim crowed. You're heavy. Yuya's hands were already slipping from the weight of this creature that was much bigger and heavier than the average house cat, and the recoil from every fireball nearly knocked him over backwards. Quit your belly aching, Grim said merrily, and whapped his arms. He was in high spirits now that he'd gotten himself the perfect vehicle. When the flames hit the ghosts, instead of spreading, they quietly fizzled out like they'd been doused with water. All around them, Yuya could hear the soft hiss of ghosts disappearing. Eee, a ghost wailed. No fair ganging up on us. Shut up, Grim snarled. There are way more of you. One ghost after another fled through the wall. Yuya chased them into the lounge and surveyed every nook and cranny of the room, holding Grim at the ready. A chorus of ghostly voices sounded. Wah! They're gonna disperse us for good. Retreat! Fall back! We've got to get out of here. Before Yuya knew it, the laughter and the screams had stopped, and the only sound in the lounge was his and Grim's panting. The storm outside had also faded into a gentle rainfall. The flying herd of ghosts was nowhere to be seen, and the room was in more or less good shape. It did smell a little charred, but otherwise it was the same dark and damp lounge. Grim leapt out of Yuya's arms. As he landed, he put his hands on his hips and threw his head back proudly. How do you like that? I totally smashed those ghosts. That was amazing, Grim, Yuya agreed. Yeah. A surprised look flashed across Grim's face as he averted his eyes, flustered. He had been so confident and full of pride, and yet when someone actually paid him a compliment, he seemed oddly flabbergasted. Yuya had to smile at the situation. Me-hee-hee, Grim chuckled. You were maybe all right yourself. His grin was as malicious as ever, but Yuya wasn't threatened by it the way he had been the first time he'd seen it. "What disaster has befallen this place?" came a loud cry from behind them, sending a jolt through both Yuya and Grim. They looked back in trepidation and found not a ghost in the doorway, but the head mage Crowley. "Thank goodness it's you," Yuya exclaimed. He was about to explain what had happened when something shot out in front of him. "This again?" Grim snarled. When Yuya looked down, Grim was tied up with the head mage's tough glove. "I heard screams as I was returning," Crowley said, lifting Grim with one hand. "So it was this creature again. Quite the stubborn little beast. I suppose he was getting up to mischief here too." He looked ready to throw Grim through the window, so Yuya hurriedly grabbed his arm. "No, that's not it. I was attacked by ghosts and Grim saved me." Crowley frowned. "What do you mean?" So earlier, Yuya began to explain about Grim coming in through the window, the ghosts attacking, and the two of them working together to chase the ghosts away. "I see," the head mage nodded. "Then the screams I heard were those of the ghosts?" "Exactly. I'm innocent, I tell ya." Grim thrashed around, held by the scruff of his neck. "Now that you mention it," Crowley mused, "I do seem to recall that some mischievous ghost took up residence in this dorm and scared away all the students. I'd completely forgotten that's why it was abandoned." "And you were gonna make me spend the night in a haunted dorm? You forgot it was haunted? What if I had actually been turned into a ghost? What would you do then?" Yuya put this question to him in gentler terms, and Crowley laughed. "Absurd, that was merely an old ghost joke." He looked thoughtfully down at Grim hanging from his hand. "But to think that this one here would assist anyone. You've done well to tame such a ferocious monster." "Excuse me? Tame?" Grim snorted derisively. "This kid's a total waste of skin, but I managed to make him useful." "There, you see?" Crowley gestured towards the angry Grim. "Very defiant. You have remarkable skills to be able to bend one like this to your will." Yuya mustered up the courage to ask what he really wanted to know. Head mage," he began. "Yes?" Crowley looked up to him. "So, Yuya mumbled, are you finished with your research in the library?" All expression disappeared abruptly from the head mage's face. He tilted his head slightly to one side and nodded slowly. He appeared to be choosing his words carefully. "I am indeed finished. I did not contain my search to the library, but rather availed myself of every method I could think of. Asking the other teachers, looking online, all of that." Yuya silently urged him to continue. "But despite my best efforts, I could find no trace of this Japan that you spoke of," Crowley told him. "It has never existed anywhere in Twisted Wonderland at any point in recorded history." "So that's it then," Yuya sighed. "Yes, you have indeed come from a different world. But the confounding factor here is that the total lack of information. In the 100 years that I've been head mage, I can safely say that I have been witness to a great many surprises. But I have never encountered anything like this. And without any precedents, I could not find a way to return you to your original world." "You couldn't?" Even said so bluntly, it didn't feel real. Yuya had been so scared by the prospect of being trapped there that he nearly burst into tears. And yet when he was told that this was effectively the position he was in, he couldn't quite believe it. Deep down, he assumed that this would all work out somehow, convinced that something so cruel could never happen to someone so utterly average as him. But he was wrong. No one knew how to get him home. If there was some way to do it, it was not going to be easy to figure out. How was he supposed to keep going now? What was there to live for when he woke up in the morning? Crowley lowered Grim to the floor and cleared his throat. Yuya automatically shuddered. Well, this is difficult to say, Crowley began, but given that you are not a student at our fine college, I cannot allow you to stay here for free. Education must be fair above all else. Okay. Yuya could only hang his head at this. However, Crowley paused thoughtfully, I believe accommodations might be made if you would consider working for me. Huh? Yuya's face shot up, and he stared at the head mage. Except for the faculty, everyone employed at the college is a ghost. But a staff of ghosts is not always optimal, you see. Crowley's eyes shone. It was hard to tell because of the mask he was wearing, but his mouth was curling up slightly in what appeared to be a smile. It would truly pain me as an educator to abandon a boy without a penny to his name. I would personally find it a great help if you were to do odd jobs on campus while I attempt to find a way to return you to your original world. As for pay, well, that would be an amount commensurate with the work performed. He smiled. What do you think? Yuya wanted to hug him. He'd be able to keep going for now, at least. Crowley was giving him a roof over his head and food on his table, not to mention a purpose. I think that sounds great, he said. Thank you so much. In his great relief, the tears he held back earlier rolled down his cheeks. Dear me, Crowley laughed. Well, my charity knows no bounds. Oh, there is just one condition. Sure, Yuya nodded. What is it? You must attend to Grim, he stated firmly. Grim? He pointed automatically at the disgruntled monster, and Grim's ears twitched. What? Me? Yes, Crowley replied. Given that you are unable to use magic, I am somewhat concerned about leaving you alone on campus, But with Grim by your side, you should be able to handle anything that might come up. Monster and magic-free alien. It's best that the two of you join forces, and from what I can see, you've already gotten quite friendly. But Yuya protested, but Crowley cut him off. He is unusually persistent, you see. Who knows what he'll get up to if left to his own devices. But I know I won't have anything to worry about if you're with him, Crowley was trying to get rid of a nuisance by making Grim Yuya's responsibility. He was about to insist that he really wouldn't be able to rein Grim in when the monster in question shoved him out of the way. So I can go to school here? Grim shouted with delight. No, Crowley said in a clipped tone. I told you would stay at the school to do odd jobs, cleaning the campus and maintaining the facilities. You will not be a student. Cleaning? Grim was obviously unhappy with this. What kind of deal is that? I'm gonna look so stupid. I don't want to sweep up people's junk. How shameless of you, the head mage cried angrily. The winds were suddenly blowing in a dangerous direction. Crowley looked as though he might take back his offer at any second. Yuya yanked Grim back in a panic and whispered in his large ears. Quit it. If you keep this up, he'll throw you out again, okay? I don't want to be a janitor, Grim whined. Yuya could only stay there on the condition that Grim stayed with him. Living with this selfish creature was bound to be rough, but it had to be better than being shut out in the cold. And Crowley was right. Yuya would be happy to have the help of someone who could use magic. He crouched down so he was at eye level with Grim. The monster was clearly dissatisfied with the special requirement, but this made Yuya feel like he could count on him somehow. I just know the head mage will let you in at some point if you stick with me, he said desperately, trying to persuade Grim that this was in both of their best interests. I mean, he's got to, right? Grim grunted as he looked away and crossed his arms. And if you get thrown out again, I know you'll only sneak back in, right? Yuya continued. So living here with me saves you a whole lot of work. They'll feed you and you won't have to wander around in the rain anymore. Feed us? Grim turned and met his eyes. You mean I can have a can of tuna whenever I want? Yes, exactly. He bobbed his head up and down. Tuna was Grim's thing. Yuya could probably make that happen. Perhaps Yuya's pleas had struck a chord, or maybe Grim realized that the arrangement was to his advantage. He put his hands on his hips and said, Fine, I will deign to live here with you and I'll work. For now, anyway. Wonderful. It's a done deal then, Crowley nodded, having watched over the proceedings. Once you've finished with your official duties, you may of course make use of the library and other facilities as you please. I have no doubt that you would like to do some research yourself, Yuya. You may also use this dorm however you like. Great, thanks, Yuya said. Crowley took a silver key from the bundle on his keyring. Yuya recognized it as a key to this building from the glimpse he'd gotten when they first arrived at the dorm. It was a simple old thing, but it was scratched free and gleaming brightly, as if someone had taken good care of it. Yuya clenched it tightly in his fist. Thank you so much for this opportunity, he said, shaking Crowley's hand with his free hand and letting out a sigh of relief. He wouldn't have to worry about how he'd get by while he figured out where to go from here. He and Crowley grinned at each other, while at their feet, Grim tapped his claws loudly against the white bag Crowley was carrying. This is smelling real good, Grim remarked. Ah, so you've noticed, Crowley exclaimed, delighted. There's a pot of soup in there. You are hungry, aren't you? So it is food. Grim leaped forward. No. Crowley yanked the bag up and handed it to Yuya. You'll share it nicely, and you'll do the same thing tomorrow as well. Starting now, the two of you are one. Now that Crowley had mentioned it, Yuya was very hungry. He hadn't had anything to eat since his lunch at school, and he had no idea how long that had been. His stomach was growling. Take this as well, you. Crowley held out a soft package, and Yuya took it in his arms. What is it? He asked. Bedclothes and a school uniform for you to wear tomorrow. You no doubt have quite the time trying to get anything done wearing our ceremonial robe. Ah, how truly thoughtful I am. Yuya was concerned about being in uniform when he wasn't a student, but Crowley told him they had plenty to spare, so he accepted it. Tentatively opening the package, he glimpsed a black jacket and a white shirt. There's actually a vest to complete the set, Crowley told him, but those are distributed by the dorms. You should be fine with just that. Yes, of course, Yuya said. Thank you so much. Proof of my tremendous generosity. Eat and get yourself right to bed. I'll need you to work those fingers to the bone starting tomorrow. Crowley patted Yuya's shoulder gently and left. Crowley had an oddly detached air despite his exaggerated expressions of delight, surprise, and sadness. He was a strange person, but he was also the only person Yuya could count on at the moment, as he'd given him food and a place to live. Though he seemed to be a bit half-baked, perhaps he really was just as kind and benevolent as he repeatedly insisted that he was. Yuya had no choice but to have faith in that. Hey, Grim said. Yuya looked back away from the door Crowley had disappeared through and back at Grim. What? At some point, the monster had gotten up on the table so that he was basically at eye level with Yuya. What's your name, anyway? Yuya realized he hadn't introduced himself yet. Yuya Kurogi. Yeah. Grim frowned. Ugh, that's a tough one. I'm just gonna call ya you. Rejoice, you. Super genius and future amazing mage Grimm's decided to make you his henchhuman. He thrust his chest out in a show of extreme confidence. The white fur there was fluffy and looked soft to the touch. He seemed so pleased with himself that Yuya couldn't bring himself to be annoyed at this absurd declaration, and simply laughed instead. Grim was selfish and reckless, but he was also forthright. Yuya felt he was right to rely on this little monster and his magic ability. It emboldened him somehow, and he suspected his new roommate would be coming to his rescue again and again. Thanks. He extended a hand to shake, just as he had with Crowley. When he gripped Grim's small paw, the tips of sharp claws grazed his palm. He started a little, but they didn't scratch him, and the soft paw pads felt nice in his hand. Yaha! Grim flashed his teeth. Okay then, hand over the grub this second. And that was the end of chapter 3. So that seems to have covered quite a lot of the initial prologue and tutorial stages. So we got introduced to Yuya as our protagonist. It's quite interesting to be able to get this much insight into one of the Yu's personality. Because in the game, Yu is fairly genetic, and then in the mangas, or Hearts of Buell, Savannah Claw, and Octagonal, the Yus have their own sort of personality, but Yuya is quite interesting, I find, to kind of read about, because they describe him as being very ordinary. Nothing really stands out to him, and he gets scared of things happening around him. He has very human and realistic reactions, I find. So it's very interesting in that way to be able to read and see the description of one of the protagonists. And so it's also interesting to note too all the extra details that went into, especially when describing, the ghost chase that happened in the game, and also with the orientation itself, with Riddle, and they really did do Riddle quite a fair bit of justice. Like, made him sound super imposing, really confident, super strong, while also giving very brief descriptions of the other twist casts. Well, I love reading the little extra details there too. Yeah, I like how they're making Riddle, how they're describing him, even though Riddle is quite small in frame, it also gave him that leader aura that he has. He's got, the imposing nature of a queen. I did like it. Well, thanks, Popstar Queen. I'm glad it felt very atmospheric while reading. It was fitting too, especially in the ramshackle dorm when it started raining and thunderstorming. I'm like, oh, I set the rain and thunderstorm here in the background as well. I think it makes it as a cozy atmosphere. I personally love sleeping to the sounds of thunderstorm and rain in the background. Yeah, I think I'll leave it and I'll stop reading at this point in time. I think we reached the 2-hour mark. But I hope you guys enjoyed it. This is the first kind of stream I've done on a more kind of low-key, chill basis. I'm kind of speaking and narrating in this voice and volume. I did my best to give some of the characters a little bit of, a personality. I gave Grim a little bit of his own voice to differentiate between them. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you felt very nice and chill. If people are interested, I might consider continuing to read through more chapters of the novel. I don't know if we'd be able to read the whole novel necessarily, but I wouldn't mind doing more of some ASMR style chill reading streams. Actually with more background rain and stuff. So yeah. let me know in the chat or comments if you'd like to have more of the streams or kind of read more through the novel. I figured too, since they didn't really have an audiobook released yet, not that I'm aware of, so there's no audiobook version of this. And I don't think I can really necessarily post an entire audiobook reading, because I think that's actually not super allowed. But just reading some parts of the book on stream, I think that should be okay. But we can go through this again. You guys like? Let me know. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you have a very restful evening, a very nice, good rest. Make sure to go to bed. Don't stay up too late. Get some good sleep. Thank you, coworkers, for coming to and listening to tonight's stream. And I will see you guys in the next stream or video. Thank you. I hope you all rest well as well. Until next time then, this is Koa Miyo, clocking out and heading to bed soon. Good night, everyone.